The war between the Valorian Dominion and the Galactic Coalition had lasted for 300 years, and in that time, more than 40 billion souls had perished across 1,000 burning worlds. Nobody remembered why it started anymore. And nobody cared, because hatred had become its own reason, passed down from parent to child, like a cursed inheritance that nobody wanted, but everybody accepted. Then humanity arrived. They came from a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy, a species so young that the Valorians laughed when they first made contact, and the Coalition dismissed them as irrelevant children stumbling onto a battlefield they could not possibly understand. But humans had a strange gift that nobody expected, and that gift was the ability to talk to anyone about anything without their pride getting in the way. Within 5 years of first contact, human diplomats had done what 3 centuries of warfare could not accomplish: convinced both sides to sit at the same table and discuss peace. The Valorian High King Talrek was not pleased. He stood 12 feet tall, with silver skin that gleamed like polished metal, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of a species that had conquered half the galaxy through the power of their minds alone. For all Valorians were telepaths who could crush starships with their thoughts and shatter mountains with their will. Peace meant the end of his power, because his throne rested on the bones of enemies, and without war, his people might start asking questions he did not want to answer. So he made a demand that he believed would destroy the peace before it could begin. If humanity wishes to broker this treaty, he declared before the assembled delegates of 100 worlds, then humanity must prove its commitment with blood and bond, and I demand a marriage between my house and theirs. The galaxy gasped, because everyone knew what this meant. Valorian royal marriages were not simple ceremonies, but psychic bonds that linked 2 souls together for eternity. And no alien species had ever survived such a bonding, for their minds were too weak to withstand the overwhelming power of Valorian consciousness. The human delegation asked for 1 day to consider the demand, and when they returned, they said yes. King Thalrek could not hide his shock, but he recovered quickly and made his next move, offering his youngest daughter Salith as the bride, which was an insult wrapped in silk, because Salith was the child he valued least, born to a concubine he had discarded long ago. She was beautiful in the way all Valorians were beautiful, with silver skin and eyes like frozen stars, but she had always been too quiet, too thoughtful, too unwilling to embrace the cruelty that her people called strength. When she learned of her fate, she felt nothing at all, because she had learned long ago that feeling. Things only brought pain. Earth's United Council selected their representative with great care, searching for someone who embodied everything humanity wanted the galaxy to see, and they chose Commander Marcus Cole. He was 34 years old, with brown skin and brown eyes, and a smile that came easily, even in dark times. He had served as both soldier and diplomat in humanity's short time among the stars, earning respect from allies and enemies alike through his patience, his honesty, and his stubborn refusal to give up on anyone. When they told him he would marry an alien princess to save the galaxy, he asked only one question: "Does she want this?" The council members looked at each other in confusion, because nobody had thought to ask what the princess wanted. Marcus shook his head and said he would do it, but he would do it his way. The wedding took place on a space station in neutral territory, with representatives from every known species, watching through screens and sensors as history unfolded before their eyes. Salith stood in ceremonial armor that weighed more than Marcus's entire body, her face a mask of cold perfection, as she waited for the creature she would be bound to forever. And she had prepared herself for something pathetic, something barely sentient, something she would have to endure for the sake of duty. Then Marcus walked toward her, and she felt the first crack in her armor. He was so small compared to her people, standing barely 6 feet tall, and his body was soft where Valorians were hard, fragile where they were unbreakable, mortal where they were eternal. But he walked without fear. He approached her with steady steps and warm eyes, and when he reached her, he did something that nobody expected. He bowed. Not a small bow, but a deep bow of genuine respect, the kind that warriors gave to other warriors. And when he rose, he looked into her eyes and spoke words that she would remember for the rest of her very long life. Princess Salith, I know this is not what either of us would have chosen, but I promise you this. I will never treat you as a prize or a burden, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you are placing in me today. Salith stared at him, unable to respond, because in 200 years of life, nobody had ever spoken to her like she mattered. The ceremony proceeded according to Valorian tradition, with oaths spoken in the old tongue and psychic bonds attempted between the couple. And this was the moment King Thalrek had been waiting for, because the bonding would destroy the human's fragile mind and end this farce forever. Salith reached out with her consciousness to touch Marcus's thoughts and complete the bond. She found nothing, not emptiness, not a wall, not resistance, but simply nothing at all, as if his mind existed somewhere she could not reach. Telepathy could not go. Somewhere deeper than she had ever known existed. The ceremony ended without the bond being completed. But nobody except Salith noticed, and she said nothing, because she did not understand what had happened, and she was not ready to admit her failure. King Thalrek barely concealed his contempt as he handed his daughter to this weak little creature, telling her with his thoughts that she was dead to him now, cast out like garbage to live among savages. Marcus noticed the king's expression, and though he could not hear the telepathic words, he understood their meaning, and he filed that knowledge away for later. He took Salith's hand with a gentleness that surprised her, and together they walked from the ceremony as husband and wife, two strangers bound by politics and war and a treaty that nobody believed would last. But as they boarded the ship that would carry them into their new life together, Salith felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt curious. Who was this human who walked without fear into the den of monsters, and why could she not read his mind? And what secrets did his species carry behind those warm brown eyes? She did not know the answers yet, but she intended to find out, and that intention would change the galaxy forever. The diplomatic vessel Covenant became their home for the months that followed, a massive ship that carried representatives from dozens of species as it traveled between worlds to finalize the peace treaty that humanity had made possible. Salith kept to herself at first, watching her human husband from a distance, like a scientist studying a strange new creature. And she told herself that her interest was purely practical, that she needed to understand this species if she was going to survive among them. But the truth was more complicated than she wanted to admit. Marcus confused her in ways that no one ever had before. Every morning he woke before the artificial dawn and exercised his body in ways that seemed almost painful, pushing himself through routines that left him gasping and covered in sweat. And when she asked him why he tortured himself this way, he laughed and said that humans were not born strong, so they had to make themselves strong through effort and repetition. Every evening, he sat with data tablets and audio recordings, teaching himself her language, word by word, sound by sound, and his pronunciation was terrible at first. So bad that she wanted to cover her ears, but he never stopped trying, never gave up, never accepted that something was too hard for him to learn. And every night before he slept, he asked her the same question. "Is there anything you need?" She never knew how to answer, because nobody had ever asked her that before, and the question itself felt like a gift she did not know how to accept. The weeks turned into months, and Salith found herself doing something dangerous. She found herself caring about this strange little creature who had become her husband. She watched him diffuse a confrontation between Valorian and Coalition officers who had served on opposite sides of the war, both of them ready to kill each other over old wounds that would never fully heal. Had stepped between them without weapons or armor, using nothing but words and patience and a calm voice that somehow made both warriors feel heard. She watched him work 18-hour days, negotiating trade agreements and prisoner exchanges and border disputes, giving everything he had to a peace that most people believed would fail. And when others told him he was wasting his time, he just smiled and kept working. She watched him take a plasma burn meant for a Valorian engineer during an accident in the engine room, throwing himself in front of the blast without hesitation, and the wound was severe enough that a Valorian would have needed days to recover. But Marcus was back on his feet within hours, bandaged and pale, but refusing to rest. That was the moment when Salith realized she needed to understand what was happening inside her. She went to him that night while he was trying to sleep, his body still healing from the injury that should have killed him. She demanded to know why he had done something so stupid. "He has children waiting for him on his homeworld," Marcus said, his voice weak but steady. "And I made a promise to bring everyone on this ship home safe, so it seemed like the right call." "You could have died," Salith said, and she was surprised by the anger in her own voice, the fear that she had not known she was capable of feeling. Marcus looked at her with those warm brown eyes and smiled that infuriating smile, and he said something that broke something open inside her heart. "Then at least I would have died, doing something that mattered." Salith sat beside his bed for a long time after that, watching him sleep, and she made a decision that would have consequences she could not yet imagine. She tried again to read his mind. She was the daughter of the most powerful telepath in the Dominion, trained from birth to wield psionic power like a weapon, and she had shattered the mental defenses of warriors and kings and gods alike. But when she reached toward Marcus's consciousness, she found the same impossible nothing that she had encountered at their wedding. It was not that his mind was empty or weak or primitive, because she could sense that something was there, something vast and warm and impossibly deep, but it existed in a place that her telepathy could not touch, like trying to grab water with fingers made of smoke. She reported this to her father through a secure channel, keeping her voice neutral as she described what she had discovered, and King Thalrek dismissed her concerns with the contempt she had expected. "Humans are simply too primitive to register on psionic frequencies," he said, "like trying to read the thoughts of an insect. So do not waste my time with such trivial observations." But Salith was not convinced, and she began watching Marcus even more carefully, looking for clues that might explain what made humans so different from every other species in the galaxy. She noticed that the other humans on the ship were the same way, their minds invisible to her telepathy, despite her best efforts. And she noticed that they all shared certain qualities that seemed impossible for such a fragile species to possess. They were stubborn beyond all reason, refusing to accept defeat even when victory was impossible, fighting and struggling and clawing their way forward against odds that would have broken any other species. They were loyal beyond all logic, forming bonds with each other and with aliens they barely knew, treating friendship like something sacred that could never be betrayed. And they were hopeful beyond all evidence, believing that tomorrow could be better than today, that peace was possible, that enemies could become friends, that the galaxy could change if enough people wanted it to change. Salith had lived for 200 years among a species that could read each other's thoughts and crush enemies with their minds, and she had never encountered anything as strange and terrifying as human optimism. One night she asked Marcus why his people were like this, why they kept fighting and hoping and caring when the universe seemed designed to crush such things. He thought about the question for a long time before answering, and when he spoke, His words were simple, but they carried weight that she could feel in her bones. "Because we do not live very long," he said, "and we know that we cannot change everything by ourselves. But maybe we can change something small. And maybe the next generation can change something small too. And maybe if enough of us keep trying, someday the world will be what we dreamed it could be." Salith stared at him in the dim light of their shared quarters, and she understood for the first time that she had married something far more dangerous than the monster her father had warned her about. Married someone who believed in things, and belief, she was beginning to realize, was a power that even telepathy could not defeat. She reached out and took his hand, and he looked at her with surprise and hope, and she said 3 words that changed everything between them. "Teach me how." 1 year passed since the wedding that had shocked the galaxy, and in that time, something unexpected had happened. The peace was working. Trade routes that had been closed for centuries reopened between Valorian and Coalition worlds, and ships that had once carried weapons now carried food and medicine and hope. And children who had grown up knowing only war were learning that the universe could be something other than a battlefield. King Thalrek watched this transformation with growing fury, because every day of peace was a day that weakened his grip on power, and he knew that if this continued much longer, his own people might start questioning whether they needed a warrior king at all. He needed war, and he needed it soon, and that meant he needed to destroy the symbol that had made peace possible. He needed to destroy Marcus Call. The summons arrived on a morning like any other. A formal invitation for Princess Sylith and her human consort to attend a celebration on the Valorian throne world, a ceremony honoring the anniversary of the peace treaty that had changed everything. Sylith read the message 3 times, and each time she felt the ice spreading through her veins, because she knew her father better than anyone, and she knew that this was not a celebration. This was a trap. "We cannot go," she told Marcus, her voice tight with fear she could not hide, "because my father is planning something terrible, and I will not let him hurt you." Marcus read the message himself, his brown eyes moving slowly over the formal words, and when he finished, he set the tablet down and took her hands in his. "What do you think he is planning?" Sylith hesitated, because she did not want to speak the words that had been forming in her mind. But Marcus deserved the truth, so she told him. "There is an ancient Valorian tradition called the Right of Worthiness," she said, "which has not been invoked for 6,000 years, but it was never officially abolished, so technically it still exists, and it allows a king to challenge the consort of a royal to prove their value through combat against the king's chosen champions." Marcus nodded slowly, his face calm, despite the death sentence she had just described. "And if I refuse?" "Then the marriage is considered invalid, and the treaty dies with it, and the war begins again." "And if I accept?" Sylith's eyes filled with tears that she had sworn she would never shed again. "Then you die, because my father's champions are the most powerful warriors in the Dominion, each of them capable of crushing starships with their minds, and no human could possibly survive against even one of them, let alone 3. She expected Marcus to argue, to make excuses, to find some clever diplomatic solution that would let them escape without fighting. Instead, he pulled her close and held her while she cried. Her tears finally stopped. He wiped them away with gentle fingers and spoke words that broke her heart and healed it at the same time. "I knew what I signed up for when I agreed to this marriage," he said, "because I read every piece of history I could find about your people, and I knew that someday your father would try something like this. And I decided then that I would face whatever came, because the peace is bigger than me, and your people need to see that humans do not abandon their own." Sylith grabbed his face and forced him to look at her. "You will die," she said. "Do you understand that, Marcus? You will die, and I will have to watch, and I cannot bear it." Marcus smiled that infuriating smile that she had grown to love more than anything in the galaxy. "Maybe," he said, Or maybe your father will learn something about humans that nobody in this galaxy has figured out yet. They traveled to the Valorian throne world on a ship filled with human diplomats and coalition observers, all of them aware that they were walking into danger, none of them willing to let Marcus face it alone. The planet itself was a monument to Valorian power, covered in towers of silver metal that stretched toward the stars, filled with billions of beings who had been taught from birth that they were the chosen rulers of the universe. King Thalrek received them in his throne room, a vast chamber of crystal and light, where the air itself hummed with psionic energy. And he sat on a throne carved from the bones of his enemies, his silver face twisted into a smile that held no warmth at all. "Welcome, daughter," he said, "and welcome, human, to the heart of the Dominion, where we will celebrate the peace that you have brought to our galaxy." The words were poison wrapped in silk, and everyone in the room knew it. The celebration lasted for 3 days, filled with feasts and performances and diplomatic speeches that meant nothing. And through it all, Salith watched her father, watching Marcus, like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On the 4th day, the strike came. King Thalrek stood before the assembled guests and announced that he wished to honor the human who had married his daughter by invoking an ancient and sacred tradition, a chance for the consort to prove his worthiness before the eyes of gods and mortals alike. The rite of worthiness. The chamber fell silent, and Salith felt the world crumbling around her. Because this was the moment she had feared, the moment when everything would fall apart. She stepped forward to protest, to demand that her father withdraw this obscene challenge. But Marcus caught her arm and held her back. "I accept," he said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber with a calm that seemed impossible. "And I thank the king for this opportunity to prove that humanity stands behind its commitments." Not hide his surprise, because he had expected the human to beg, or bargain, or try to escape. But Marcus simply stood there, with his warm brown eyes and his steady hands, looking like a man who had already made peace with his own death. "The challenge will take place tomorrow at dawn," the king said, "in the arena of ancestors, where the greatest warriors in our history have proven themselves, and you will face 3 of my champions in combat, until one side can no longer continue." Marcus bowed with the same respect he had shown at their wedding. "I look forward to it." That night, Salith came to him one last time, and she begged him to run, to hide, to let her face her father's wrath alone, because she could not bear to lose him. Not now, not after everything they had built together. Marcus held her close and whispered words that she would carry in her heart forever. "I love you, Salith, and I am not going to run, because running would prove everything. Your father believes about humans, and I would rather die standing than live knowing I abandoned you when you needed me most." She kissed him then, a desperate kiss filled with everything she could not say. And when dawn came, she walked beside him to the arena, where her father waited. And as the doors opened, and the crowd roared, and the champions emerged to destroy the small, fragile creature who had dared to challenge the might of the Dominion, Salith prayed to gods she had never believed in, that somehow, impossibly, the man she loved would survive. She did not know that her prayers were about to be answered in ways that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. The arena of ancestors was a colosseum carved from a single mountain, its seats rising toward the sky in rings of silver stone that could hold 1,000,000 spectators. And on this morning, every seat was filled with Valorians who had come to watch a human die. They cheered as their champions entered the arena, 3 warriors who had earned their places through decades of combat and conquest, each of them standing over 10 feet tall with muscles like coiled steel and minds that could shatter planets. The first was Vornak the Destroyer, who had killed 10,000 enemies in the last Great War, and wore their memories as trophies inside his consciousness. The second was Selthira the Storm, who could summon psionic lightning that burned hotter than the cores of stars. The third was Malketh the Unbreakable, who had never lost a fight in 300 years, and whose mental shields were said to be absolutely impenetrable. Thalrek had chosen to destroy his daughter's husband, and every person watching knew that the human would not survive the first minute. Marcus walked into the arena alone, wearing simple combat clothes that offered no protection, carrying no weapons, showing no fear. Salith watched from the royal box beside her father, her hands gripping the railing so hard that the metal bent beneath her fingers, and she could hear her father's smug satisfaction radiating through his thoughts like poison. "Watch carefully, daughter," he whispered in her mind, "and see what happens to those who dare to stand against the Dominion." Marcus stopped in the center of the arena and looked up at the champions who towered over him like gods looking down at an insect. "I have heard much about Valorian honor," he said, his voice amplified by the arena's systems so that everyone could hear, "and I hope that today I will see it for myself." The champions laughed, and the crowd laughed with them, because the idea of a human speaking about honor to Valorians was the funniest thing any of them had ever heard. King Thalrek raised his hand to signal the beginning of the combat. Let the rite commence. The three champions attacked as one. Vornok struck first with a psionic assault that carried the weight of 10,000 dead souls, a wave of mental agony designed to shatter minds and leave victims screaming until their hearts stopped. Selthira followed with lightning that crackled across the arena floor, enough power to vaporize a battlecruiser. Malketh projected a crushing force that could flatten mountains into dust. The combined attack was the most devastating display of Valorian power in living memory. Enough force to crack a planet's mantle, enough energy to destroy entire fleets, enough fury to break any species that had ever existed. It washed over Marcus Cole like water over stone. Untouched. He stood unmoved. He stood unreadable. The arena fell silent, because no one understood what they were seeing, because what they were seeing was impossible. The champions stared at the small human, who should have been atoms scattered on the wind, and for the first time in their lives, they felt something they had never experienced before. They felt afraid. "How?" Vornok whispered, his voice breaking with confusion and terror. "How is this possible?" Marcus looked at him with those warm brown eyes, and he smiled. "You want to know the secret of humanity," he said. "Then let me show you." He started walking toward the champions, his steps slow and steady. And with each step, something impossible happened. The psionic attacks that were still hammering against him began to weaken, not because the champions were holding back, but because their power was draining away, flowing into something vast and hungry that they could not see or understand. The human delegation in the stands had risen to their feet, all 500 of them, and they were watching Marcus with expressions of fierce concentration, and the Valorians around them began to notice something strange. The air around the humans was different, heavier somehow, like reality itself was bending toward them. King Thalrek felt the first stirrings of genuine fear as understanding began to dawn in his ancient mind. Humans generated something far more terrifying. They generated a null field that did not merely block psionic power, but absorbed it, drained it, consumed it like a black hole consuming light. And right now, 500 humans were pouring their combined will into their representative in the arena, making him a conduit for something that the Valorians had no defense against. Marcus reached the first champion, and Vornak tried to strike him with fists that could shatter starship hulls. But the blow landed without force, because all the psionic enhancement that made Valorians superhuman had been drained away, leaving nothing but ordinary muscle against a man who had spent his entire life training his body to be strong. Marcus did not strike back. He simply caught the fist and held it, and Vornak the Destroyer, killer of 10,000, collapsed to his knees as the last of his mental energy flowed into the void. "You called us weak," Marcus said, quietly. "Because we are small and soft and short-lived. And you were right, because compared to you, we are all of those things." He released Vornak and walked toward Selphira, who screamed and hurled lightning with every ounce of power she possessed. But the lightning faded before it could reach him, swallowed by the null field that surrounded him like armor made of absence. "That is why we learn to be strong in other ways," Marcus continued. "Because when you are weak, you have to be clever. And when you are soft, you have to be brave. And when you are short-lived, you have to make every moment count." Selphira fell when he touched her shoulder, her eyes rolling back as her power emptied into nothingness. Only Malketh remained, the unbreakable, the greatest warrior of his generation, and he stood his ground as Marcus approached, because 300 years of victory had taught him that surrender was not an option. "I will not yield to a primitive." Snarled. Marcus stopped in front of him and looked up at the giant with something that might have been pity. "You are not yielding to a primitive," he said. "You are yielding to the truth, because the truth is that your power comes from your minds, and our power comes from our hearts, and hearts are stronger than minds will ever be." He placed his hand on Malketh's chest, right over where a human heart would be. "This is what humanity is," he said. "Not strength, not power, not immortality, but this. We stand for each other, we fight for each other, we die for each other, and nothing in this universe can break that." Malketh the Unbreakable fell to his knees, then forward onto his face, unconscious but alive. The arena was silent. 1,000,000 Valorians stared at the small human standing among their fallen champions, and they understood that everything they had believed about the universe had just been proven wrong. Marcus turned to face the scene. Royal box, where King Thalrek sat frozen with shock and rage. "Your daughter is not a bargaining chip," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silence like thunder. "She is my wife, and I love her, and humanity protects its own." He turned and walked toward the exit, not looking back at the champions he had defeated, not gloating, not celebrating, just walking away like a man who had done what needed to be done and wanted nothing more than to go home. The crowd parted before him without a word, and Salith watched him go, with tears streaming down her silver face, tears of relief and joy and overwhelming love for the impossible man who had just changed everything. But as she turned to follow him, she saw her father rising from his throne, with murder in his ancient eyes. The battle was not over yet. King Thalrek had ruled the Valorian dominion for 3,000 years, and in all that time, he had never known defeat, had never felt fear, had never once doubted that he was the most powerful being in the galaxy. Now he watched a human walk away from his broken champions, and something cracked inside his ancient heart. He could not allow this. He would not allow this. "Stop," he commanded, and his voice was not merely sound, but psionic force that could shatter mountains and still hearts across star systems. Marcus stopped, but not because he was compelled to obey. He stopped because he was waiting for what came next. The king descended from his throne with movements that made the air tremble, his silver body glowing with accumulated power that had been growing for millennia. And as he walked toward the arena floor, the spectators fled in terror, because they knew what was coming, and they did not want to be caught in the destruction. "Think you have won something here today," Thalrek said, his voice echoing through dimensions that mortals could not perceive. "But you have won nothing except a more painful death." He raised his hands, and the sky itself began to crack. The throne world shook as the king drew power from the psionic network that connected every Valorian in the Dominion. billions of minds lending their strength to their sovereign, creating a weapon of consciousness that could destroy solar systems. "I am the king of the Valorian dominion," he roared. "I have crushed empires and broken gods, and I will not be humiliated by insects." The human delegation was already unconscious, overwhelmed by the psychic pressure that radiated from the king like heat from a sun. And Marcus stood alone against the full fury of an ancient god. But he was not afraid. He thought of Salith and the way she laughed when she forgot to be cold, and he thought of their late-night conversations about hope and change and the future. And he thought of the children they might have someday, children who would grow up in a galaxy at peace. He thought of Earth and the billions of humans who were counting on him to show the universe what humanity could be. He thought of all the people who had ever loved him and believed in him and trusted him to do the right thing. And then he did something that he had never done before. He opened his heart completely and let everything he was pour out into the world. King Thalric struck with power that could crack planets, and Marcus should have been destroyed, should have been erased from existence, should have been nothing but atoms scattered across the arena. But Marcus was not alone. Salith was running toward him before she even knew what she was doing, her feet carrying her into the arena, where her father's wrath was turning reality itself inside out. And she did not know why she was running, only that she could not let Marcus face this alone. She reached him just as the king's attack crashed against the null field, and she did something that no Valorian had ever done in the history of her species. She chose to anchor herself to a human mind, not through telepathy, because that had never worked, but through something older and simpler and more powerful, through trust, through love, through the choice to stand beside someone no matter what came next. She reached for Marcus not with her powers, but with her heart, and she found herself welcomed into something vast and warm and unbreakable, a place where minds did not read each other, but simply knew each other, a place where souls did not dominate, but embraced. She saw through his eyes, not his thoughts, but his feelings, his fear, because yes, he was terrified, he had always been terrified. But he had learned long ago that fear was not a reason to stop fighting. She felt his determination to protect the peace they had built, his hope for a future where their children would never know war, his love for her that had grown slowly over their year together, until it filled every corner of his human heart. And she felt something else, something that made her weep even as she laughed. She felt how much he believed in her. Not the princess, not the weapon, not the bargaining chip. Her. Salith, the woman who asked too many questions and cared too much about people who would never care about her. The woman he loved exactly as she was. Their connection blazed to life like a star being born. Human nullfield and Valorian psionic might merging into something that had never existed before. A bridge between species that everyone had believed was impossible. King Thalrec's attack broke against them like waves against a lighthouse. The king staggered backward, unable to comprehend what he was seeing, unable to understand how his daughter, human husband, could be standing against power that should have destroyed galaxies. "What are you?" he screamed, and for the first time in 3,000 years, there was fear in his voice. Marcus and Salith spoke together, their voices blending into harmony. "We are the future." The king attacked again and again, each assault more desperate than the last, but his power could not touch them, could not break them, could not do anything except drain away into the void of their combined will. And as his strength faded, as his attacks grew weaker and weaker, the Valorian people watching from their hiding places began to understand what they were witnessing. They were witnessing the fall of a tyrant. They were witnessing the rise of something new. King Thalrec collapsed to his knees, his ancient body trembling with exhaustion, his mind empty of the power that had sustained his rule for 3 millennia. "Kill me," he whispered, "because I would rather die than live in a galaxy where humans are anything but slaves." Marcus looked down at the broken king with something that might have been pity. "No," he said, "because death would be too easy, and you deserve to live long enough to see everything you believed in proven wrong." He turned away from the fallen king and took Silet's hand. "Let your people judge you," he said over his shoulder, "because they have seen the truth today, and the truth is that humans are not your enemies, and peace is not your weakness, and maybe, just maybe, a galaxy without war is worth more than a throne built on bones." The Valorian people judged their king that very day, not with violence, not with execution, but with something far more devastating for someone who had built his identity on power and fear. They judged him with silence. They turned their backs on him and walked away, millions of them flowing out of the arena and into the streets of the capital. And as they walked, they began to talk to each other about things they had never dared to speak of before. They talked about peace. They talked about change. They talked about a future where their children might know humans as friends instead of enemies. A new council rose in the days that followed, made up of Valorians who had grown tired of endless war and seen in Marcus and Salith the possibility of something better. And they asked Salith to join them as a voice for peace and reconciliation. She accepted, on one condition: her husband would stand beside her always. The galaxy learned a new truth in the years that followed, a truth that spread from world to world like wildfire, changing everything it touched. Humans were not gods. They were not invincible, or immortal, or all-powerful. They were small and soft and short-lived, exactly as everyone had always believed. But they were also something else. Tyrants had every reason to fear. They were incorruptible. Their minds could not be broken or controlled, or bent to the will of others. They chose their loyalties freely and held them absolutely. And when they loved someone, they loved with a fierceness that could break kings. 10 years after the day that changed everything, Salith stood on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt Valorian capital with her husband beside her, watching the sunset paint the silver towers in shades of gold and rose. Their twin daughters played in the garden below, half human and half Valorian, bridging two species with every laugh and every smile, living proof that the impossible was only impossible until someone decided to try. "Do you regret it?" Salith asked, the same question she had asked 100 times over the years. Marrying the most terrifying woman in the galaxy, with that infuriating smile she had grown to love more than life itself. Never. She laughed and leaned into him, marveling that she had ever thought his species was primitive. "I meant leaving Earth," she said, "leaving your people behind." Marcus squeezed her hand and looked out at the world they had built together. "You are my people, Say," he said, "you and them." He nodded toward their daughters, who had discovered a small creature in the garden and were arguing in 2 languages about what to name it. "Humanity is not a planet," he said. "Humanity is a promise that we do not leave family behind, no matter where they come from, or what they look like, or how different they are from us." Salith felt tears forming in her eyes again, tears of joy this time, tears of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought this impossible man into her life. "I love you," she said. "I know," he replied, "and I love you too, and I will keep loving you until the stars burn out and the universe grows cold. And even then, I suspect I will find a way to keep going, because that is what humans do." She kissed him then, as their daughters laughed and the sun set on a galaxy at peace. And she thought about all the years they had ahead of them, all the adventures they would share, all the ways they would continue to change the universe simply by loving each other. Humanity had come to the stars as newcomers, dismissed and underestimated by everyone they met. They had earned their place, not through conquest or domination, but through something far more powerful. They had earned it through hope, through love, through the stubborn refusal to give up on anyone or anything, no matter how impossible the odds. And as night fell over the Valorian capital, and the stars came out one by one, Salith held her human husband close and smiled. The galaxy was finally ready for them. We're just getting started.